friends. This is Tim Young from the Como Cottage. This evening, I'd like to present Thomas R. Smith reading from his brand new book, Storm Island, which was published by Red Dragonfly Press. Of course, we'd prefer to have Thomas here in the cottage, reading live, but that's not wise these days. So here's a pre-recorded video of Thomas R. Smith in his backyard reading from Storm Island.
This is Thomas R. Smith, and I'm going to read from my new collection, Storm Island, published by Red Dragonfly Press. And before I even start, I have to give special thanks to publisher Scott King for achieving the miracle of even publishing a book in a difficult time like this. And I want to thank Tim and Dallas for hosting this Como Cottage reading in extreme times. So thank you all for going the extra mile. I'd like to start out readings, if I have a little time, which I do today, with a poem by an older poet or someone who I admire or want to pay homage to. Lately I've been thinking about the late California poet Steve Cowett, and I'd like to read one of his poems. It's called Passing Through. Astonishing, isn't it? All of these odd-looking creatures darting around in the grass, the lizards and spiders and foraging bugs, and the ones that are nothing but dots of color flitting around on invisible wings, each with its own private sorrows and pleasures, its one precious life. How strange it is to be here at all, talking to you like this in a poem, if just for a single brief instant, two spirits momentarily touching. Isn't it weird? Don't you feel it too? How unspeakably odd everything is. Friend, walk mindfully here. Do no intentional harm. Even the least of these creatures, the tiniest sentient speck, longs to live out its one brief season on Earth. As Steve Cowett from his book, First Noble Truth. So, this is really the first real reading I've done from this book since it's become an actual object in my hand instead of a pile of manuscript pages. And I'll just say a couple of things about the organization of the book. It's really centrally concerned with time. Time is the overall theme of this book, and it treats of time in several different manifestations from different angles. It treats of time in a linear biographical fashion, treats of time in a cyclical annual fashion, and then goes into some historical time, and later on toward the end of the book tries to loft into the timeless. That's the hardest one to pull off, so it's up to you to decide whether I've done that or not. I'm going to read a couple of poems from each of the sections, and you'll see how this progresses. This is from the first section called Youth and Desire, and it's really about myself, but I put myself into the third person in it. It's a childhood poem. It's called For Ray Harryhausen, Animator. He was the animator of those stop-motion models in some of those fabulous old monster movies of the 1950s, which my parents wouldn't let me go to see. So this is how I dealt with that deprivation. For Ray Harryhausen, Animator. He could spend hours copying in pencil the ads for the monster movies his parents declared him too young to view, self-taught to render the suckered tentacles of that giant mutant octopus menacing the Golden Gate Bridge, the hubcaps on steroids, flying saucers, beaming devastation down on well-groomed man and woman scientists, and best of all, the fast-growing Venusian Emer, cornered by the army in the Roman Colosseum. Even the thumbnails on the local theater calendars were gold for the young copyist, reliably opening tiny windows to trance. At least there was nothing to stop him gaping before the posters and lobby cards displayed outside the theater, hub of dreaming for that small town Main Street perched above the more inscrutably dreaming river. He loved those scenes of exciting mayhem, the world always under attack by powerful chaotic forces, such as an imaginative boy his age might feel were secretly on his side, pitting their fury against adulthood's killing dullness and fear. Not the fun kind, like those gargantuan tentacles, striking blows at the very footings of order, little knowing that by bringing them fully inside himself, he made them 1,000 times more real than those wonderful stop-motion models lovingly crafted for the big screen. Yet it gave him hope to know that in far-off Hollywood there were men who'd smuggled out of the prohibitive land of childhood some of that beautiful, creative destruction. Yeah.
No, keep on going.
Oh, keep on going. Okay. All right. All right. Okay.
I'll get a little
Okay.
lower.
Okay.
There.
So, Jesus, that's okay. So, that's how this book starts, and it moves into a section called Age and Honoring. So, the trajectory here is from youth to being older, and it includes several elegies for older people that I've loved and admired, and it also it includes some poems meditating on my own age at this point. So I think I'll read you maybe at least one of each of those kinds of poems. This isn't an elegy, and I hope it isn't for a long time. But it's a poem for the poet Ed Sanders, New York poet who was instrumental in the outrageous, wonderful, creative 60s group, the Fugs. So this is called Ode to Ed Sanders, dedicated to Ed on his 80th birthday, which I think was last year, not this year. Ode to Ed Sanders. Thanks for your inventive poem glyphs. Thanks for your ahimsa provocations. Thanks for sticking up for socialism. Thanks for not severing fun from love. Thanks for your free speech shock troop, the Fugs. Thanks for swimming out to that Polaris sub. Thanks for your faithfulness to the Sharing Rose. Thanks for your vision of holy-souled Allen. Thanks for demanding American history go naked. Thanks for refusing to be burned out. We who contributed youthful libidinal energy to the 60s, now in or leaving our own 60s, over a decade into what we had hoped would be a millennium of enlightened, nonviolent consciousness, may be forgiven for failing to imagine ourselves elders in a country aging dishonorably. Far sadder to be old and right-wing and shrunken-hearted and self-hating. Ed Sanders, that didn't happen to you, and it won't happen to me, due in part to my astonishing discovery of the Fugs' second album, a buck 97, at our rural northern Wisconsin Kmart. One listen, and I knew I was bound to ride your peace eye ship, clamber on deck to join in your hairy warble. Many crew members yet to be born, buoyed on heavy seas of America. So this is a little elegy to a wonderful woman and poet and writer. It was my privilege to know in the last years of her life. Her name is Marie Shepard Williams. The poem is called Marie Said. The day Marie died, we put up the Christmas tree. The balsam fir had waited on our porch overnight, tossing in bed at 4, unable to get back to sleep, thinking of my friend who had told me many times she was completely okay with going, okay with the life she'd had in this crazy world. I'd hoped to see Marie a last time. I figure I woke 20 minutes after Marie drew her final breath, maybe felt her brush past me on her way out. A magnificent spirit, one of the freest and kindest to walk the planet. Still speaking truth to power in her 80s, she'd preface an email for some contribution or petition. Hey, I'm an old lady. If I can do this, you can too. All day, even in my intensest grief, I never felt that she was gone. Sweeping up Needle's shed when we dragged the tree in from the porch, enveloped in that opulent fragrance, I was suddenly overcome with happiness, quickly followed by self-reproach. How could I have let myself feel happy on this of all days? How insensitive was I? Marie, nearby as she'd been ever since I met her, said, "Oh, come on, enjoy it. You're not going to dishonor me by living. Hey, if a dead old lady can be happy, well, so can you." So this is a later poem in this section, and it kind of brings together the age and youth themes. And I'm always trying to do that, trying to weave the disparate parts of this theme together in this book. I live in a college town here, and there's an old, beautiful old building called North Hall that has a carillon that plays at various hours of the day. So this is called North Hall Carillon. It's college visit day at my old alma mater, and the North Hall Carillon is playing Hello Young Lovers. As fleeting as the clouds of this summer noon, the notes wisp out into a vaporous horizon, not unlike that future spread out before us, so apparently expansive, we followed here from our little towns. I suppose they're all computer programmed now, those daily songs the carillon pumps from its black rooftop speakers, all sounding wistfully lonely in their chiming that decays so fast in the airy chasms of afternoon. How perfectly fitting to greet these uncertain ones, feeling their way around campus, who perhaps don't know whether or not they're lovers, tuning the sky of their lives to the message, "Be brave and follow your star." Message they need now, perhaps more than ever, to hear, as still, no longer young, do I. And I think that one should go out to all the young people that are trying to have some kind of normal but safe, careful life right now in the time of COVID. Very hard for them. So, talking about time here, moving from linear biographical, autobiographical time into cyclical time. So it isn't an accident that the center section of this book is a group of calendar poems. It's called Impressionist Calendar. And I actually got this idea from Tim Young, who's done some of these himself. So I nakedly borrowed the idea for this book. So I'm going to read you just a couple of these. I'm reading this in November right now. So I'll read you the November poem. It's called Month of Revealed Nests. November is the month of revealed nests. I see them waist high in sumacs, the leafy baskets of the redwings that buzz-bombed me when I walked too near them on the path in June. Blessings on your departed brood, winging its small defended fires south. And there's that woven pouch, slung low over the river, only a slim branch bearing it up. If you want to learn faith, go stand under an oriole's nest. And not only birds, in the highest oak, the disheveled lodge of the squirrel, tent of leaves pitched on the sky, ragged as its shake-tailed builder's complaint from a bare branch. Most wonderful of all, the feathery globe of the wasps, paper heart dangling from the artery of a twig. Alexandria, where once the slim-waisted scholars established their library only to give away their books to the darkness and cold. Now, I live just across the street from a branch of the Kinnickinnick River. It's called the Glen. And this is a January poem called Owl in the Glen. Second day in the new year, 8:15 p.m. I step out in the lightly falling snow and hear its voice issuing from the dark folds of the glen. Soft, low, whoo, 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 whoo. Then, as if more confident, strengthened, higher, louder, whoo, 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 whoo. 10-note call, repeated over and over. The edges of everything are blunted by loose snow falling through darkness. This ecstasy was here before we came. The ice-spangled river opens her thighs for her winter sky lover. The great horned broadcasts its desire, like that bird in us that sends its song all through our body. And there's a little coda to this section. This is for New Year. I always feel a little bit sorry for the old year that's been so battered and its promise so often betrayed. I hope this isn't one of those years. This is called the Old Year. Old friend, we've come to the end of our trail. We have only a moment left before parting to glance back at that mountain that was our time together, sealed again in mystery as it was when it lay still before us. So, different kinds of time. After that section, as I said, is kind of the hub of this wheel around which all of these poems revolve in this book. If there's a stiller center, that's maybe it. After that, I go back into linear time, but but not really personal time, more historical time, could be political time. So here's a poem from that section. I've been reading this one for a few years, and I don't think it's about who you are going to think it's about, but you have my full permission to appropriate it for whatever whatever bad actor on the national scene you want to apply this to. It's called Note to Self. Well, we die, whether we stay together or fall apart. Finally, the world goes on its way without us. The most scourge-like name alive today will one day be spoken seldom, if at all. To what purpose this sighing and raging? To what purpose this pain? The main thing is to be a part of one's time, no matter which side seems to be winning. It's okay to be a noble failure, a fool in the eyes of the world, to die in the relentless faith of a Pete Seeger or Rachel Carson. The big truck taking up so much space will one day come to the end of its road. Offended decency will be forgotten. Insults will be forgotten. In 100 years, new people and new problems. And we can be sure there will be some glory in being alive in just their moment as there is in ours. Even as I write and as you read, the termites of ruin are chewing day and night at the underside of the hypocrite's mask that shines with such shameless intensity in the national spotlight. The time to speak is always now. Say your truth, if only for those who may be listening from galleries of dead and unborn, if not the childish public, locked in their death tango with destruction. Reserve for yourself days of uninterrupted silence in which to hear those things that have settled in your heart most deeply sing their faithfulness beneath time's altering sky. One of the privileges of being a published poet is being able to pay some kind of public tribute to one's heroes. And one of mine for a long, long time has been Robert Bly, the poet. This is a poem called Guzzle Ballad of Robert Bly, and it's written in the form of the quote-unquote American guzzle that Robert developed in a couple of his books. And it's dedicated to the filmmaker Haydn Reese. Haydn Reese made a documentary about Robert about 5 or 6 years ago called 1,000 Years of Joy, which I very much recommend. And this poem was written in the guzzle manner of Robert Bly the day after I had seen that documentary. Guzzle Ballad of Robert Bly. Reading the Rubaiyat, young Robert Bly overturned his tractor. It was all right. He suffered from scraped elbows and knees, but not from insignificance. After Harvard, Robert had heard enough lies. Living alone, painting warehouses in New York, he starved and wrote fevered poems, defying insignificance. Back to the Midwest, then to Norway on a Fulbright. In the Oslo Library, he watched Neruda's great torch put to flight the shadows of insignificance. Flying around the U.S., denouncing the Vietnam War, he risked prison to advise draft resistors not to let their lives be fed to insignificance. Jung and the Grimm brothers collided in his brain. The light they made showed American women and men a mountain beyond the plane of insignificance. Thomas, you saw Haydn's film on Robert last night. Like everyone else in the theater, you woke in the dark, wrestling with the angel of insignificance. I should explain that the guzzle form has the peculiarity of the author addressing himself or herself in the very last line, last stanza. It may have been a way of signing a poem in a time when poems were primarily an oral medium instead of a written medium. So this section is really a group of poems about things that have been happening historically, and I have to say that ecological concerns and climate change have been big on my mind during this time. So I wrote a poem called Zebra Mussel. We have in the North Country a plague of an invasive species called the zebra mussel, and until a couple of years ago I had never actually seen one, only heard about them, and they're very small. They're only about this big. They're tiny. Couldn't believe that this was the agent of so much destructiveness. So I wrote a poem called Zebra Mussel. No larger than a pea, this miniature shell, affixed to the stone I picked from Cass Lake. Back from the center seam, fine lines of brown and green curve on a handsome blue-eyed blue. Zebra mussel, I believe you want to live so far as a creature so elementary can, and I don't blame you for the damage you do in terrible innocence to our northern waters. I believe that inside your tiny closed helmet, razor sharp to the feet of unwary swimmers, you also keep a grain of God. But where you sow your profligate seed, other lives of fish and of plants fade as though you were a bag of poison dumped from a boat. You sprout on every small wave-washed stone I examine on this lake's life-cleansed shoreline, a morbid, sterilizing beauty. My heart becomes a wet stone, sinking in dismay at how one so small can desolate its world. Do I need to say that we also are so small, we humans? So from there, I make the attempt to lift out of historical time. I do this at the end of almost all of my books because I believe that's where poetry should leave us ideally, somewhere in the timeless. So there are love poems here. This is a poem I wrote for Krista, and it's called "Time is Love." Time is love. I got tired of hearing time is money. Hell with that. Time is love. Let's not be pulled down in the maelstrom of our grief and failure, nor imagine ourselves without help, alone. As I move through the days, awareness of your presence moderates my confusion. My thoughts are kinder knowing we walk together. Beyond anything we've given or failed to give, we have honored each other with the most precious gift we, the living, have on this earth, our time. Time is love, in which all our dedicated moments of attention and service of heart become a garden, opening petals of beauty in that wedding where our souls are still speaking their vows. So there are also some kind of miscellaneous poems of traveling to wonderful places, and I was lucky enough to spend some time in Devon, in the south of England, and one day Krista and I walked up on the moor. This is in the late spring, and the moor is this wonderful kind of elevated bog in a sense, punctuated by these kind of fancifully shaped rock formations called tors. So this is about a walk on Dartmoor, and it's dedicated to our friend and our host Sarah Delfont. And I send this out to all of our Devon friends, Sarah and Joe and Johnny and Alice and Afra and Moses and Martin. Dartmoor morning. The grass nibbled to a crew cut by spray-painted sheep. They really do this. They spray-paint their sheep to distinguish them from other people's flocks of sheep. Sorry about that. The grass nibbled to a crew cut by spray-painted sheep. Both sparkles and absorbs our footsteps on its great jeweled sponge. The early morning was quiet and vast, rock tors rising up and wooded valleys dipping below. The land wraps around in folds, no beginning or end, suggesting the eternity of nature before we came. Cattle and sheep exchange commentary. The ancient voice of the cuckoo adds its twopence worth. A meadow pipit runs through every song it knows. This music springs from hill and vale with the sparseness of the occasional gnarly moor hawthorn that has secured its lease with the rocks and the wind. Across the valley, a field of bluebells smokes the green. A farm, persistent anchorite, clings to its fold in the decayed volcanic slope. And the rocks, what to make of these piled slabs, atilt one another, the persistence of eons long eroded away, or maybe the petrified stool of giants. Earth and water are evident. Fire must be the yellow burning hummocks of gorse, the sugar heat of blueberries building toward a summer blossoming. Or do the hottest flames surge through the veins of the rangy wild ponies, the gangly black foal learning at its mother's ragged side the wild freedom of its kind? On the moor, it's air that gets the final say, determines the aspect by which we'll experience her. Mist can make lost, but these are simply two low creeping clouds rolling toward each other, one from Hay Tor and the other opposite, as Sarah observes, a dragon about to devour a snake. The crocodile jaws are wide open now, and the snake steams into it, the white a single wall, flinging its vapors higher, starting a new cloud pile. The sphinx profile of Hay Tor becomes indistinct. We're losing morning sun. A cooler weather slides in. We begin threading our way back over the moor's perfectly suspended time. So I did a little The, the book was essentially finished about a year ago last summer. Uh, as we were coming into production with it, I realized that I couldn't not include at least a couple of poems addressing our current situation in the country and in the world. But the poem I'm going to read you right now is how the book would have ended if I hadn't added those poems. So this is the last poem in the book proper, and then I'll do a couple from the coda. It's called "This Also Helps Spring Happen." In the gymnasium, on a blustery April night, while the string band Poor Benny plays, the caller calls, and braided women and men in plaid shirts swing their partners. Standing at the back of the dance floor, the little old guy from the group home, in the Packers stocking cap, pulled over a baseball cap with flames on the bill, blasts tunelessly along with the band on his lime green plastic harmonica, glad to have a part in making this music. I think that's us poets. We're all just glad to have some kind of part in playing this music, this big music that we all make together. From the time that this book proper was finished to the time of publication, of course, the COVID plague was really upon us and has gotten worse and worse and worse. These two poems that I'm going to finish with were written, I think, fairly early in it. There will be more to come. That's for farther down the road. This was one of the first poems that I wrote about COVID times. It's called "The Loneliness." It was when we were first starting to feel the loneliness of all the things that we were missing, being able to do together. Okay. The loneliness. Already a vast loneliness has seeped into our souls with the cancellations and the closings. We miss the conviviality of the restaurant table, the church service, the joy of the jamming musicians, the natural camaraderie of sidewalk and supermarket. We're not meant to be alone, not meant to deflect the approach of neighbors. Now, each locked-down house becomes a grave where small, dismembered pieces of community lie scattered alive, waiting to be called back to wholeness. We ache for each other, ache for contact. We knew it would all break down someday. Not sustainable. The center cannot hold. We are being shown something bigger. We are being called to something higher. Shall we come out of this changed, finally able to hear each other's voices across the social distance, the voices drowned out by fear? When the theaters and bars reopen, when the hospital beds are vacant again, and the world resumes its old business of getting and spending, how shall we think on these days, withdrawn from one another and the communal heart, the dead civic air? Will the grief still eat at us as it does now? Is this how it happens? A lesson we need to learn, overshadowing all our other learning? In the enforced quiet, we have space to ask these questions and listen for answers. How will we love each other and ourselves in the upheavals to come? So, not exactly a wholly optimistic poem. Some people say that, compared to the long-range destruction of the climate change path that we're on, this current crisis could look fairly minor by comparison, which is a horrendous, terrible thought. A friend of mine the other night said, after having read the book, he said, well, you give us in the end, COVID, the climate crisis, the political crisis is not very cheerful, is it? And I said, well, one thing that I do give you as well is singing. There's a lot of singing and there's a lot of music in this book, and I mean that literally. There are a lot of poems in which singing is going on, and I believe that's one of the things that can save us. I'm finishing with a poem called Back Fence Jam. One of the ways that I and a few friends stayed at least semi-sane this past spring and summer was to go out in our backyard and at a safe distance play and sing some music together. So this is dedicated to my friend Colin Cosgrove, called Back Fence Jam. It's social distancing time, and Colin and I are having one of our jams by the fence between our houses. Colin is a music teacher, just getting started, and me, I'm trying not to finish too soon. Colin is also a bluegrass whiz on guitar and mandolin, and we're out on a gorgeous spring day, playing and singing our hearts out to the grass pushing up from below and the budding trees exploding in slow motion like green fireworks against the clear blue sky. Colin sings The Old Home Place, and I sing Mountain Dew. Sometimes we request favorites of each other, and today Colin asks for Mr. Tambourine Man. I'm always ready to oblige with that Dylan masterpiece, all 4 verses. And this time, a male cardinal at the top of a big basswood tree joins in. He's way up there, warbling and trilling. I listen for him to stop, but he doesn't. He doesn't stop. He also knows this song and keeps singing along. My God, aren't we the trio? The neighbors' dogs, meanwhile, are chasing each other around their fenced-in yard. They're having a good old time, too, rolling over on their backs, feet kicking the air. Meanwhile, the cardinal, that red flame tipping the highest branch like a candle, is still trilling. And I want to stop singing and yell to the world, this is a textbook example of happiness. So I do. Then start singing again, because I don't want the cardinals to stop. I don't want the carnival to stop either. Because I don't want the cardinal to stop. And the song must go on. Virus or no virus, we must find ways to keep ourselves singing together, even if only across the back fence, and store such moments away in our bones for those other days sure to come when we find ourselves having to sing out against the silence.